Welcome to Spiraling Soul, a podcast where we merge spirituality.
And psychology.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Emma. And congrats on beginning the spiral. Today's episode, we will talk about why we started this podcast, a bit about spirituality, spiritual awakenings, and dark night of the soul. Disclaimer, take what resonates. I just wanted to give a little explanation on how we came to founding Spiraling Soul. When I was doing research on our name and kind of making our logo and coming up with that, I found a really good explanation of what the spiral means. So, one of our most ancient and enduring symbols, the spiral represents the winding journey we must take inward if we're to truly know and love ourselves. And got me thinking the spiral is seen everywhere in nature: shells, DNA, and galaxies. And I think this really ties into our intention to meld psychology and science with spirituality and the supernatural. It can also represent the natural cycles of life: birth, death, the rotation of it. It's always spiraling, it's always coming.
Our intentions for starting this podcast is to have fun and do something we love, which is make content. And because we have had a few friends ask how to become crystal girlies and how to become more self aware, because spirituality has changed our lives for the better. And it's our special interest and it's given us a sense of purpose. We want to share it with you all, and hopefully we'll wake a couple people up and they'll be as into spirituality as we are. I also think this is a good way for us to hold ourselves accountable and have motivation to continue learning about spirituality, because there's still so much that we don't know. And we wanted to make a podcast that we wish we had when we were first learning about spirituality, because it's such a confusing topic or concept to jump into, because there's so much to it. It's so deep. And when we first started learning about spirituality, we were getting a lot of witchy and woo woo type of supernatural. Or we were getting extreme ends of spirituality where it's like toxic positivity and you can't think anything negative, because there are some content creators that really swing to the extremes, which is cool if that's their belief, but we wanted to kind of tie in the science.
We want a healthy balance of being grounded in reality, but also up in the clouds.
Because we are woo woo. We still
Yeah.
believe in some woo woo witchy stuff.
We're a little woo woo.
So, what is spirituality?
So, when a lot of people first think about spirituality, what comes to mind is things like crystals, tarot, meditation, all that good stuff. And while that is an important part of spirituality, it's not all that it is. It goes so much deeper than that. And that's what we want to explore here. Get past a baseline understanding and go deep. Go deep into what it really means. Something important to note about our podcast is we are just regular humans. We're having a human experience. We're not claiming to know all the answers. Anyone that claims they know all the answers is lying to themselves and everyone else. Like, we are just here to express our opinions, our beliefs, our thoughts. Everything that we are talking about is up to interpretation. Again, take what resonates. We don't have all the answers, but that's what this podcast is about, is exploring different ideas and different belief systems. And yeah.
Because spirituality, it's such a broad and subjective concept. When I was looking up what is the definition of spirituality, there is no concrete answer. There is no concrete definition. Every dictionary, every website has a different definition of what spirituality is. Spirituality is different for everyone. No one's gonna all believe the same exact things. They'll have different ideas and different lessons that they're learning because we're all on different paths. And spirituality really can be whatever you want it to be. Again, just take what resonates. We're just here to share our thoughts. Defining spirituality is tricky, but Merriam Webster Dictionary says spirituality is the quality or state of being spiritual. And so then you're like, well, what is spiritual? We looked up the definition for spiritual, and one is of relating to, consisting of, or affecting the spirit. And another one is of or related to sacred matters and concerned with religious values. So there's so many definitions of spiritual. It can be religious for some people. Some people believe like in God, or they are in a set religion like Christianity. But because it's so subjective, we have our own idea of what spirituality is. And my definition is, to me, spirituality means that I am more than just a human. I'm a soul on a journey seeking to understand myself, the universe, and what it means to be human on a deeper level. I believe are higher powers or forces like the universe or some kind of God that are, or even spirit guides that are working behind the scenes to guide us into living in alignment with our soul's authentic purpose, and that there is more to the world than meets the eye. And I believe the more in tune we are, the better our intuition becomes, and the more we attract what is meant for us in our lives.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. My definition of what it means to me is super similar. So, spirituality to me means that you're seeking to understand the way you, yourself, and the universe work on a deeper level, looking beyond what is told to you from an outside perspective and instead turning within with what resonates in your soul. To me, spirituality is all about connection, awareness, authenticity, bringing a sense of magic into the mundane, and awakening purpose, your purpose from within.
That's a good definition. You said turning within to what resonates in your soul, which I think is the key aspect, is that everyone's soul is so different, and we're all going to have different ways to live our lives and have different purposes. So there's no quick fix of, okay, if you're spiritual, here's this path that you're going to go on and this is how you should act, because really the whole point of spirituality is trying to break down those external expectations or limiting beliefs that were put onto you your whole life. And over time, you just become less of your authentic self and more of someone who is conditioned to behave in a certain way. So, spirituality really is trying to get back to that inner child part of you, of who you are at your core, and not having shame about it.
Yeah, who you were before you were told who to be. And you are your own best guide. Everything you need is within you. And I hope that this podcast helps kind of awaken that inner power in everybody because we all have it. It just needs to come out.
It just needs to be awoken.
Hmm.
When that is awoken inside of you, when you wake up to the spiritual parts of life, that's called your spiritual awakening. So you were like unconscious of things before, and now you're conscious of it. And it's like taking the blue or red pill, whichever one Neo from Matrix took. And it's like you wake up to the reality that the world isn't really what you thought it to be, and you aren't really who you thought to be. And once you realize that, it's almost impossible to go back to living the life that you were living. And so it's called an awakening. And Emma, do you want to share your story about your awakening?
Yeah, sure. And we'll get into it a little bit, but I feel like there's different stages. So there's like an awakening, there's also a dark night of the soul, which we'll get into also, but I'll just give a general overview of like how it all started for me, how I got into all this stuff. So I've always been really into spirituality from a young age, or like understanding the unexplainable about life. I've always been really into that. But I grew up Christian, and so that was the only kind of understanding I had about spirituality for the first majority of my life until around high school, which is when I started to question and be like, I think there's something more than what they're telling me in church. But it wasn't till around junior year of college. And just to preface, I was going through it at the time. I had a lot of anxieties, depression, trauma stored in the body. Like my mental, physical, emotional well being was just a mess. And then I experienced a bunch of different unfortunate events. I went through a really bad breakup. I had a lot of huge family dynamic shifts. I also experienced a hospitalization and just a lot of health issues. I also went through some events that kind of changed my life for the better. I got my first job in healthcare. I'm a psych major, and so I was starting all my upper level psych courses, which was giving me a lot of good insight into my future and like how to understand others and myself. That was the first time I was trying like tarot and buying some crystals and experience like trying meditation for the first time. And that's really when I learned about things like manifesting and things like that. And it really changed my perspective on a lot of things. And then for a while, it was just kind of learning, taking it all in. And then 2020, the pandemic hit, which was a huge shift for all of us, I think. But that's when I graduated from college finally. And so I had a lot of time on my hands. And during that time, I really turned inward and I read some more like spiritual type books and was really just working on myself. And that's when it really took off for me. And everything kind of changed from there. So I would consider that time period my spiritual awakening, and we'll get into more of like what Dark Night of the Soul is in a bit, but first I want to hear Casey's spiritual awakening story.
My spiritual awakening was due to the fact that I was going through a dark night of the soul, and that's what triggered it. But I think the turning point of when I really started to wonder what spirituality is I took an edible and I was like so high and I could hear beeping in the background, like in my brain. And I was like, what is this beeping noise? And then I was thinking that my partner at the time was an alien in disguise. And then that sent me on this spiral of like, what is this beeping noise again? It must be that I'm a consciousness on a petri dish in an alien spaceship because the beeping sounded like spaceship noises to me. And so that's what really had me questioning like the reality. I'm like, is this even real? Are we in a simulation? This sparked an existential crisis for me. The whole next day, all I could wonder was like, how are we just walking around on Earth conscious, living in a society that like now we have all these jobs and we're so far from humanity? Like, how come other animals out in the world are just living in nature and the humans were the only ones to, I guess, gain consciousness? And now we're living completely different than what is natural. And then I was thinking, well, if I'm conscious, like, where is that consciousness? How am I conscious? How am I hearing my thoughts? How did the earth even begin? Are there other like humans? Are there other conscious creatures out there? So yeah, I just had an existential crisis. And then I'm like, what's the purpose of this? Like there has to be a purpose of me being here right now. And if not, then it feels just pointless. So I'm on Earth and I'm just walking around and I'm just gonna die one day. And like the whole point is just for me to survive living on Earth until I die. I don't know. So that was my existential crisis, and I think my spiritual awakening of when I just started questioning everything.
It's kind of interesting. It's not like going through a traumatic or like wild event like that, or like my experiences. It's not a requirement for spiritual awakening, but normally it starts with something really bad or really, yeah, just something that completely makes you start to question everything. It's like almost when things fall apart in your mind, then it triggers your spiritual awakening. So it's like
Yeah,
it's not a requirement to go through something, but that's normally how it starts.
yeah. Normally, people's spiritual awakenings are started by going through the dark night of the soul. And typically, it's because some kind of traumatic event happens. Something in your reality changes, like there's a death in your family, or you go through a divorce, or you get fired. Something just completely changes what your life was like, and you almost lose a sense of your identity.
Yeah, and it's also you can kind of that's that's a good explanation of the dark night of the soul and transitioning into that. Um yeah, it just has you questioning reality. And I think we you can go through multiple dark nights of the soul. Unfortunately, we don't want to do it, but sometimes it's necessary for growth. But like I'm just thinking in my case, so I think it was probably a dark night of the soul how it all came to be, like what I had mentioned, like health issues, breakup, divorce, things like that I was experiencing. But then I feel like I also had a second dark night of the soul, which I only feel like I'm really coming back out of recently. It was kind of after I feel like I had my awakening. It was really a good blissful time, and I kind of referenced tarot a lot. It was like the Fool card. Like, I was like, "Oh, everything makes sense now. I have all the answers, all the tools, and things like that." And again, this was during COVID when we were all stuck at home, so I was in my own little bubble for a bit. Going back out in the world a year or two later made me realize, oh, I actually need to apply everything I learned in my relationships, and it really caught me off guard how everything was actually not okay still. I had so many things that I hadn't addressed, so many issues, and I
You were in hermit mode. And
yeah.
so when you're hermit mode, you're just by yourself and no one can trigger you. And
Mhm.
so as you're going through the spiritual awakening and you're learning so much about yourself, and you think that
Mhm.
all your problems are solved, you healed all your trauma, but then you go out into the world again and you get triggered.
Yeah. Yeah, so I went through another period of realizing, oh, I actually have a lot of stuff to work on, and I need to apply what I've learned from within because I finally had reached a point within myself. I was comfortable with myself, but there's there's still so much to work on, and it's never ending. It's a whole life journey process. You're going to go through periods of joy and fulfillment and love and feeling so at peace. But it only takes one event, one human event, because we all go through stuff to set you back or not set you back. You're always going up. If you're visualizing your journey, it's like this. It's like you go down a little, up more, down, but you're never going back down because you can never unlearn what you learned. So you're going to have dark nights of the soul, but it's just part of the process. It's a part of being human. Embrace it. Embrace the shadow. What's your kind of dark night of the soul, would you say?
Yeah, so I feel like I've gone through multiple Dark Night of the Souls. Um, and the first one was at the start of 2020, something happened at work that made me step up and take more responsibility and work more while I was going to school full time in my last year of college. That period of my life was really hard because I was so stressed. I was working or learning so much. I didn't have much time for myself, and it was really hard for me to cope with that. And the only way I could get through this time was to imagine how happy I will be once I'm graduated. I'm like, once I graduate college and I'm working full time, like, I will be so happy and I'll have money and I can go do stuff. Well, then I graduated and I finally had that job. And my whole life I've done this too, of just thinking once I end this period, that's when I'll be happy. I just need to suffer until this is over and then I can be happy. So I had my full-time job and I was happy for a little bit. Like, I got my own apartment, like I could actually do stuff that I wanted. But then a few months in, I realized that working a 9 to 5 and doing accounting was sucking my soul away. Like, I was so depressed. I felt hopeless because this was the solution to all my problems. And it didn't help. And I'm like, there is absolutely no way that I can go the rest of my life forcing myself to work in a job that I don't enjoy, where once I'm done, I have no energy to do anything else. And then I'm just looking forward to the weekends. And I could not do that for the rest of my life. Like, I was like, that I will die. Like, I would rather just not be here if that's the life that I have to keep living, because it's destroying me. And so then I decided to achieve my ultimate goal, which was to start a business. So I was like, if I start a business and I get clients of my own, then I can charge like double the amount of money that I'm being paid at work right now. And then I can work part time and then I'll have so much freedom to do whatever I want. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. So again, I went in grind mode where I was like, I just have to push through. I just have to work this 9 to 5 and do this business on the side until I get enough clients to quit. And finally, like 6 months later, I was able to quit my job. And I was happy. I was like, wow, look, I can barely work and I'm still making about the same amount of money. But then, yeah, pretty soon after, I was like, I don't like this either, because at the core, I just didn't want to be an accountant, even though I thought my whole life that's what I was going to be. So now I had achieved this big goal and I was like, I should be happy. And when I achieved my ultimate goal and I wasn't happy, that's when I realized the pattern that I've been doing my whole life of just pushing off being happy and thinking that I can get happiness from like outside sources, and by just forcing myself into places or jobs that don't align with my soul just because I don't think that my true calling will like make me enough money to live. That I'm kind of coming out of that dark night of the soul of realizing this whole identity that I've had my whole life is now crumbling.
Yeah, it's like in tarot, we'd probably call that death card or the tower card. It's like death of a old way of thinking, an old way of being, something you were told to be just wasn't in alignment with you anymore, and you have to let that part of yourself die, and it's so hard because it's
Yes.
you're that's like that's what you're programmed to think like, and you've been thinking, acting, feeling this certain way for so long, and you when you get a sliver of realizing, "Oh, it can be different." It just hits you so much harder because you're like, this is not how life should be,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, it 100%. makes sense. And it's so hard clinging on to that identity because maybe you were taught you can't make money in creative ways. You have to be a bit in business or in a medical field. And when you've been told that basically your whole life and that you can't make money doing the things that you want, once you decide to change and go for what you want, it's so scary because now you have the judgment of like your family or your friends who think there's only one way to live.
Two things. One, your spiritual awakening, your spiritual journey was really brought on by your profession, what you do for a living. Like that's been a super integral part of your journey. Mine
Yeah.
is more centered around, or the things that I've had to work on are more centered around relationships with others and myself, because that's been a huge barrier for me in my life from a young age. Like I was always told to be small and not, I couldn't be myself around people. I also just went through a lot of moving and shifts in my early life, so I never fully was able to like settle into one place and have a community, and that's kind of been my whole journey, is like finding myself as a place in a community. So your spiritual awakening, all this process can be brought on by different reasons, but then you meet at the center, and the core of what it is just being, is just healing. That's what it all is.
Yeah. It's healing and becoming your most authentic self and becoming a person that is safe for your loved ones to be around too. Because if you aren't healing wounds from the past, it can just hurt other people.
Mhm. Hurt other people, and you're only hurting yourself. And
Yeah.
also, taking this route, you might get a lot of excitement starting this journey because it seems so great. Like, oh, I'm going to be healed. But it's kind of the harder route to take because it's hard to face these parts of yourself that you don't want to face. But that's a part of it, to heal from that. And you have to kind of face the things you don't want to see, which is really hard.
And if you don't, then you just keep repeating the same patterns that have kept you unhappy.
Yeah. Which is why that's the easier way to go, because it's hard to change that. But in the long run, that's actually the hardest route, is not choosing to heal and face yourself.
And if you don't heal it and you don't figure out who you truly are and what you truly believe, you're going to end up way later down the line, probably in your 40s or 50s, when you have like quarter and like a midlife crisis. And it's better have like this crisis when you're younger and don't have as many responsibilities and don't have kids and don't have a husband that you probably don't even like because you didn't do the work on yourself and you were just blindly going along with whatever life threw at you. It's hard either way.
Yeah. But ultimately, choosing the path of healing, and if you're listening to this right now, that means you're probably somewhat interested in these topics, which is a huge start. Um, it's the way to go. It's it's how to lean into the human experience and feel everything and be okay with that. It's all about acceptance. Um, Something about spirituality, I was going to say, this word came to my mind. A lot of what we'll talk about in this podcast is like a box of tools for you to use. So when you think about like tarot, for example, I've already referenced it a couple times. It's a tool you can use to deepening your understanding. So that is kind of how to go about spirituality, because you know what it is now. Okay, what do I do next? Well, you learn the tools to deepen that understanding and spiral further down into your soul.
That was beautiful. We've been messing around on how to incorporate like the spiral and the soul, and you just did it. Good job.
There we go.
I feel like we should talk about feeling connected to a greater or higher power or source. So, a large part of spirituality for a lot of people is feeling like you're connected to a higher power, whether that be the universe or like source or God. For me, I have this deep knowing that there is something greater at play and that we're just not humans. Like there's stuff working behind the scenes.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like I've always had this sense since I was little that there's something else there that I didn't quite understand. And again, I grew up religious, so that to me was God, which we'll get into it in another episode more centered around religion and talking about that experience. But it's like this feeling that you're not alone and that something is here to help guide you, and you just kind of have to listen because it's always been there. You just have to listen, you just have to tune in. There's so many different ways to go about it. One way is for me is going out into nature and really just sitting in nature, looking out at it and thinking every living thing on this planet is connected in some type of way. There's something here, and we don't have all the answers, but we definitely will explore into some thoughts about it. But it's a huge part of spirituality is feeling like there's something more to life than just existing.
Yeah, that's gonna be like a whole other episode because that
Mhm.
that is a lot. So we're wrapping up. I double dog dare you to write in your journal about either one or two of these questions. Okay, if you're new to spirituality, I dare you to write about what about spirituality speaks sparks your interest. And if you're already into spirituality, I dare you to journal about what does spirituality mean to me. That was so hard for Emma and I to come up with, okay, what is spirituality to me? Because it's just this feeling. So I think
Mhm.
it's really interesting to explore that.
Yeah, I like that question. I kind of had journaled about that earlier this week since we were struggling to come up with definitions, and we're like, we know what it is, but it's so different for everyone. It's so complex. Definitely journal. We have some fun stuff coming up. Our next episode is about how your thoughts are not you, and we're going to talk a lot about your thoughts, all about thoughts. And then we're also going to have some episodes coming up about manifesting and like the law of attraction, law of assumption, that type of thing. We're going to talk about understanding yourself on a deeper level, things like self love, shadow self. We're also going to get into some stuff down the line, a little bit more out there, things like that.
More
So,
woo woo.
a lot of woo woo stuff. Yeah, it's gonna be so much fun, and I'm really excited, and I'm so glad if you're still listening that you're here, and we both appreciate it so much.
And if you liked it, it would be super cool if you left us a 5-star rating on whatever podcast platform you're listening to and following us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. We also have social media. We're going to have that linked in the description below if you want to check us out on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. We also have a Reddit where you can ask questions and hopefully we'll have a community of people who will like help answer your questions or we'll answer them in a later episode.
Yeah, thanks for following along on our journey. You're in it with us now, it's official. And yeah, tune in next time to begin to spiral deeper and deeper into the soul.
Next episode will be in 2 weeks. on Tuesday. See you then.
Have a good day, everybody.
Peace and love. Peace and love.